Bhagavate Uttam Shloke Bhakti Vaibhava SB Om Jnantimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Mukham karoti vachanam pranamanyate gire yatripatamam vande Shri Gurudevataranam Bhavanandam Madhavam. So we'll resume the discussion from 4th canto, chapter 29, verse 55. So this is essentially the section of the instructions, the final sections of instructions by Narad Muni, wherein he's trying to create a sense of urgency in Prachina Bhari, that after being convinced of the futility of fruitive activities, to renounce everything and take to the path of bhakti. So while that conviction is there, but still it's not strong enough for him to take an immediate action. So Narad Muni explains by the allegory of the deer, that a deer is happily eating fruits, grasses, and listening to the sounds around him, but he's unaware that there is a tiger at one end and a hunter at the other end. Right. So in this verse 55, he's going to be explaining the allegory, which is pretty straightforward. Nandgopal Prabhu, can you do read the translations?
I can read, Prabhu. Don't worry.
Your mic is working, Prabhu?
Yeah, I was using other monitor, so that was a problem. So I stopped using that one.
Okay. So this is verse 55, chapter 29. Svatam vichakshya mrigache stitam atmanuntash chitam niyacha hridikarna dhumim schachite jahi angana shramam asatam yuthagatam prini hamsa sharanam viram pramyena.
My dear king, just try to understand the allegorical position of the deer. Be fully conscious of yourself and give up the pleasure of hearing about promotion to heavenly planets by fruitive activity. Give up household life, which is full of sex, as well as stories about such things, and take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the mercy of the liberated souls. In this way, please give up your attraction for material existence.
So, so as noted that Narad Muni is now expanding on the allegory, and he's giving now strong direct instructions to Prachina Bhari, right? So in this, he's giving him 5 instructions. First, he says, be fully conscious of yourself. Right? So this is another way of saying that reflect, be introspective, understand what and why you are doing. Secondly, he says that give up the pleasures of hearing about promotion to heavenly planets by fruitive activity. Right, so Prachina Bhari is not at the point where he's actually experiencing the heavenly planets. Essentially, he's hearing about the description of the planets given in the Vedas, and he's taking pleasure from that, understanding that that would be his destination. So Narad Muni says, give up that, because what you hear, you will think about, and what you think about, you will will yourself, and then you will do it. So cut it from the root. Just like hearing about Krishna is potent, hearing about so Gramya Katha, and this is not really Gramya Katha, but this is just hearing about what the Vedas, how the Vedas are glorifying heavenly planets, give that up. Thirdly, he says that you give up household life, which is full of sex, as well as stories about such things. So where are the stories coming from? They're again coming from the Vedas, which describes about the pleasures of pious household life. This is here. Stop hearing about such things and actually give up your household life. So basically take vanaprastha. Now what to do after giving it up? The fourth instruction is that take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the mercy of the liberated souls. So Narad Muni is providing both disengagement and engagement. So after disengaging from the material conception, engage with the spiritual conception through the mercy of the liberated souls, which is essentially an instruction to serve the devotees and get their mercy. And the fifth is, in this way, please give up your attraction for material existence. Right. So so if you notice in the verse, Narad Muni is asking Prachina Bari to leave immediately. But then he says, Viram Kramena, to gradually become detached. So this is Narad Muni giving a practical instruction that there will be a gap between the external and the internal. So giving up means that simply leaving the house and going away. But it does not mean that within his mind and his thoughts, he has given it away. And Narad Muni recognizes that's not going to happen right away. But the first step is to physically detach, and then Viram Kramena, and then gradually become detached. So simply going into the forest does not mean anything. It simply creates a favorable environment. It is said the forest is in the mode of goodness. One tends to live a simple life. It creates, it fosters a life of detachment, but does not necessarily mean that it will happen. So that has to happen by the fourth instruction, that take shelter of the personality of Godhead. Right? So when Narad Muni says, through the mercy of the liberated soul, he is essentially indicating that Prachina Bari should practice sadhana Vaidhi. So by the continuous practice of devotion, then within an environment that is conducive, he will take to bhakti and develop detachment. So we see that the Srimad Bhagavatam is speaking exclusively about Bhagavad Dharma. However, there are sections of the scriptures that also speak about Varnashram Dharma. They admonish against premature detachment. They glorify the importance of following your prescribed duties, right? Which is essentially the mood of Bhagavad Gita, where even before Krishna talks about bhakti, gives Arjuna the importance of acting according to his Satya Dharma. In the first canto of the Bhagavatam, we see that after the end of the Mahabharata war, Yudhishthir, he was unwilling to take up the rule of Hastinapur, because he witnessed the carnage, the millions of people that were killed, and he began to feel very guilty that just for me to ascend on the throne, so many people were killed. So at that time, the instructions that he received from different personalities. Krishna instructed him, and Dhaumya instructed him, but it did not change his heart. And the Acharyas say that Krishna, by his instructions, changed the heart of Arjuna. Why was he not able to change the heart of Yudhishthir? And the reason they gave is because Krishna wanted to glorify Bhishma. And Bhishma, he gave him instructions that were strongly in the area of prescribed duties. Right? So we see Bhagavatam presenting that. In Chaitanya Charitamrita also we see when Mahaprabhu was in a South India yatra, then in Kurma Kshetra, he lives in the house of a Brahman, and the Brahman is so much influenced by the potency of Mahaprabhu that he wants to immediately give everything, go to Vrindavan. Give up everything and go to Vrindavan, and Mahaprabhu instructs the Kurma Brahman that best thing for you to do is to stay home and preach. So these are sections of even the Bhagavad, the scriptures that speak about Bhagavad Dharma, that are talking about the importance of Varnashram Dharma. And then there are also sections where people are chastised for showing undue detachment. I mean, for showing undue attachment. Like Vidur instructing Dhritarashtra, excessive attachment. This particular section, Nag Muni instructing Prachinabhari. So essentially the point that is being made is that one should do what is appropriate to that circumstance. And this includes the stage of development of the person, the situation of the person, and where the person is desiring to go. So we see that in the Bhagavad Gita, the whole mood of instruction of Krishna to Arjuna is Mam Anusmara Yuddhayacha. 8th chapter. Krishna says that that my dear Arjuna, Mam Anusmara, that while thinking of me, Yuddhayacha, you should fight. Right? Now, we see in Uddhav Gita, Krishna gives the opposite instruction to Uddhav. So, Uddhav wants to follow Krishna. And Krishna says to Uddhav, you leave everything and go to Badrika Ashram. Wear a tree bark and meditate. He is not saying Uddhav that because Uddhav was also a prince in the Vaishnu dynasty, cousin of Krishna. So he did not tell Uddhav that this is your duty, go to Dwarka and protect or whatever. He says you immediately leave everything from here, right from here, Prabhat Kshetra, you go to Badrika Ashram. You give up everything, you meditate on take shelter of the stages, meditate on Narayan there. So what this means that the Lord and his representatives, they teach the same Bhagavad Dharma depending on the circumstances. Right? So another example that when the Dvija Patnis approached Krishna, then Krishna, he instructed them to go back and serve their husbands. And even though they showed inclination to stay, Krishna was very firm that no, you should go back. When the gopis came to Krishna, then Krishna initially gave the instruction that, my dear gopis, you go back to your fathers and husbands. But when the gopis insisted, then Krishna said, fine. He was happy that they stayed. Why? Because the gopis were at a much more exalted position than the Dvijapatnis. Their bhakti was strong enough to digest any material repercussions. So Prabhupada says that that being in the Grihastha ashram, being under the control of one's wife, is essentially that is Grihastha ashram, being under the control of one's wife. Then he says that one has to give up all of this and put himself into the ashram of the Paramhamsa, which is under the control of the spiritual master. And this is what is done first externally, and then it does happen internally. Srila Prabhupada also talks about this in the context of preaching in the current situation. So he quotes Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur that Hamsa Sharanam refers to the cottage in which saintly people live. So excuse me. So it may be beneficial for a saintly person to go to the forest and live in a cottage. But then Prabhupada says that if one becomes a preacher, especially in Western countries, he has to invite many classes of men who are accustomed to living in comfortable apartments. Therefore, in this age, a saintly person has to make proper arrangements to receive people and attract them to the message of Krishna consciousness. And then he quotes, gives the example of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He says that he introduced for the first time motor cars and palatial buildings for the residence of saintly people, just to attract the general public in big cities. The main fact is that one has to associate with a saintly person. In this age, people are not going out to search out for a saint in the forest. So the saint has to come to the big cities and make arrangements to receive people in general. So here Prabhupada is talking about the principle of preaching that trumps the conventional understanding of becoming a Paramhamsa. Conventionally, a Paramhamsa is Hamsa Sharanam. Hamsa Sharanam, he says, is living in a cottage in the forest. But in the current day and age, a Paramhamsa is living in the middle of the city, because the real purpose of going into an exalted ashram is to preach. If you live in a forest and nobody is coming to take instructions, then it's useless to live in a forest. Once Prabhupada was traveling on a plane, and one person came and asked, "You're a sannyasi?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "I heard that sannyasis are not supposed to travel by aeroplanes. So why are you traveling by aeroplane?" And Prabhupada said that in the current day and age, because people are running away by traveling on aeroplanes, I have to travel by aeroplane to catch them. So that was just the mood of Prabhupada and Bhakti Siddhanta. And then he quotes this verse from Nectar of Devotion. Anasaktyan Vishwayan Yatatma Payantata Nirbandha Krishna Sambandhe Yukt Vairagyam Uchyate. Using whatever there is in the pleasure of Krishna. Okay. Moving on to the next verse, 56. Rajo Vacha Shutam Manivikshatam Brahman Bhagwan Yadiyabhashata Naita upadhyaya kim na bruyur viduryadi.
The king replied, "My dear Brahmana, whatever you have said, I have heard with great attention. And considering all of it, I have come to the conclusion that the acharyas, that is, teachers, who engaged me in fruitive activity did not know this confidential knowledge. If they were aware of it, why did they not explain it to me?"
So in 4 verses, 56 to 59, further questions by Prachina Bhavi. Right. So at this point, Narad Muni has completed his part of the instructions. So he spoke about the allegorical story. He explained the symbolism in the story. He gave the process of, he showed the samsar cycle. Then he gave the process of bhakti, and then he instilled urgency in Prachina Bhavi by giving the allegory of the deer. So now Prachina Bhavi is going to ask about the science of reincarnation. So Prachina Bhavi has obviously accepted Narad Muni as his guru. And Prabhupada comments that real knowledge means searching out Krishna. That there are many teachers and schools and relatives and priests who are talking about so many things. But they're all either revealing half-truths or they're revealing truths that are inconsequential. So fortunately, we have access to Prabhupada's books that gives us the real understanding of spirituality. Right? And that is our saving grace. So Prabhupada says that in the current day, there are churches and temples and mosques, and they are not attracting people because the foolish priests cannot elevate their followers to the platform of knowledge. So because they themselves are not aware of the real goal of life, they are also keeping their congregation in ignorance. So this is why those who are discriminating or intelligent, they become uninterested in the ritualistic ceremonies. Unless they know why it's being done, what is the philosophy, they become disinterested. They just look at it as a series of rituals that lesser intelligent people blindly follow. And then Prabhupada says that this is why the Krishna consciousness movement is very important, because it is giving real knowledge. And he says, following the footsteps of Maharaj Varishman, everyone should take advantage of this Krishna consciousness movement and abandon the stereotype ritualistic ceremonies that go under the garb of so many religions. So this is Prabhupada's takeaway from this and his instruction to us. That Prachina Bhavi was hell-bent on enjoying piously. He was hell-bent on going to heaven. And Narad Muni came by fortuitously and showed him that going to heaven is like going to hell. No difference between the two. He instilled detachment and gave him knowledge. Prabhupada says we also are similarly fortunate that we have the guidance of Mahaprabhu, the Goswamis. He quotes Sanatana Goswami as compared to Hari Bhakti Vilas for guidance of the Vaishnavas. So the Vaishnavas, not caring for the lifeless activities of the priestly classes, take to Krishna consciousness and become perfect. That is described in the previous verse as Paramhamsa Sharanam, taking shelter of the Param Hamsa. Once there was a devotee, and in South India they have these processions. One part of the deity worship, elaborate deity worship, is that the deity goes out, or not the altar deity, but what are they called? They're called festival deities. So they go out.
Utsav Murtis.
Utsav, yeah, thank you. So they call Utsav Murti. So they go out, and then people kind of go behind them. So there was once devotee who went back to his hometown. There was this Utsav, Mahotsav being done. So he followed the deities. And then he says that I became tired very quickly following the deities. And then he was surprised because he said that I participate in Rath Yatras and pulled the cart and walked behind the cart and danced in front of the cart for hours together. So then he realized the difference was that there was no kirtan in the simple following of the deities. So he was saying the singing and the dancing, maybe it's more exhausting, but it actually infuses vitality in the devotees. Why? Because they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Like a fish in the water, it can swim for unlimited amount of time, but not so in the land. So the nature of the jiva is to sing and dance and enjoy in the association of devotees and Krishna, and that's why it is not time. So the point that Prabhupada and Nad Muni is trying to make is that the quicker we align ourselves to a constitutional position, the better we will feel and the faster our progress will be. Okay. So this was the first question by Maharaj Prachinabhari, that not really a question, but it was prefaced with a question, that I seem to have been misled by my teachers. He said, I've come to the conclusion that my teachers have not given me complete knowledge. And then he also answers, rhetorically, he answers that they did not give me because they themselves did not have it. Next verse, 57. Samshayotra tume vipra sanjanastat krato maham rashayopi himuyanti yatra nendriya vrityaha.
My dear Brahmana, there are contradictions between your instructions and those of my spiritual teachers who engaged me in fruitive activities. I now can understand the distinction between devotional service, knowledge, and renunciation. I had some doubts about them, but you have now very kindly dissipated all these doubts. I can now understand how even the great sages are bewildered by the real purpose of life. Of course, there is no question of sense gratification.
So Maharaj Prachinabhari is glorifying the rarity of knowledge given to him by Narad Muni. And the reason is glorifying it is because the knowledge is clearly explaining Bhakti, Gyan, and Vairagya. So he says that even the sages who have conquered their senses are bewildered. Out of illusion, they perform karma kand and make people like me also do the same. How unfortunate for persons like us. So the doubt that was instilled by previous teachers who had taught that Bhakti, Gyan, and Vairagya is not possible. So that's why they had encouraged him to perform karma. And we have, almost all of us might have had practical experience of this, where people say that work is worship, or they say in this current day and age, all that is not possible. Study of the scriptures is not possible. Bhakti is not possible. Renunciation is not possible. So best thing for you to do is do your duty. And they'll quote some verses from Bhagavad Gita, mostly Karmanya Vedakaraste. Right? So the real reason that the people give such instructions is because they themselves are unable to give up karma. Because they themselves are attached to sense gratification, they do not want others to follow a different path. Now, interestingly, Prachinabhari, he has also included those who have conquered their senses, right? Because he says that that I can understand how even great sages are bewildered by the real purpose of life, right? So he's talking about those who are actually have gone to the next stage, that they have been able to control the senses. So Prabhupada, he writes about the rarity of bhakti. So in the purport, Prabhupada writes that the bhakti movement of Mahaprabhu received much opposition from the karma jad smartas. So he says that these people are described as karma jad smartas, which indicates that they are priests engaged in ritualistic ceremonies. It is here stated that such people become bewildered. And to save the populace from such persons, one should strictly follow the instructions of Krishna and surrender unto him. So these instructions are simple but confidential. That's why Prachinabhari says that even great sages who have controlled their senses, they may not have this knowledge. Because sense control is at a lower level. Sense control is basically being able to live a pious life. But they may not have the spiritual understanding. So one who comes in contact with the devotee is the most fortunate one. Prachinabhari is making this point because he is receiving instructions that very few people are qualified to give. And the reason they're not qualified to give is, he gives two reasons. One is they don't themselves know. And the second is they themselves are addicted to sense enjoyment, which essentially covers the majority of the populace. Okay, verse 58. Karmanyarabhate yena pumaniha vihayatam amutranyena dehena jushtani sayadashnute.
The results of whatever a living entity does in this life are enjoyed in the next life.
So now the setup for the question is coming. So in two verses, Prachinabhari will ask about the signs of transmigration. So Vishwanath Chakravarti translates this verse as giving up the body by which he performs actions, a person enjoys results in a different body on another planet after death. Right? Which is Prabhupada has paraphrased it more succinctly, that the results of whatever living entity does in this life are enjoyed in the next life. So this is a lingering doubt in the mind of Prachinabhari. Now what is the doubt? that is it right to perform act in one body and suffer or enjoy the consequences of it in another body? Now, this doubt is mostly towards the process of karma, because the goal of the process of bhakti is not to have another body. So Prachinabhari would not be questioning about the action and reaction that span from one birth to another. But in Karma, there is this birth after birth going on. So he's asking this question about how does transmigration work? That a person does activities in one body and then he enjoys and suffers it in another body. So this is essentially the law of karma and the law of transmigration. The question seems to be a little bit of a non sequitur, but as we will see here, that even Prachinabhari is he's an exalted personality, highly intelligent. So he's asking this question for a very specific purpose, which gets revealed later on, mostly through the instructions of Narada. In the purport, Prabhupada writes that this is the question that generally a person does not know how one body is linked with another. Then how is it possible that one suffers or enjoys the results of activities in this body and yet another body? Right? Sometimes people complain about the law of karma, that I don't know what I did in my previous lifetime. Why is it that I am suffering? They won't complain about enjoyment. They complain about suffering. That previous lifetime I was another person. So I am essentially suffering the results of the activities of another person. And even though we are all familiar one is by reading Bhagavad Gita, also because of a cultural background, we are intimately familiar with the whole process of transmigration and law of karma. But we'll see that here the answer is more systematic and scientific. So Narada Muni breaks it down into the component pieces and then explains it. And then, as I mentioned, that the question is not really about transmigration. The question is something else, but that gets revealed through the answer that Narada Muni will give. Okay, next verse. Iti veda vidam vada shruyate tatra tatraha karma yat kriyate proktam proksham na parkashate.
The expert knowers of the Vedic conclusions say that one enjoys or suffers the results of his past activities. But practically, it is seen that the body that performed the work in the last birth is already lost. So how is it possible to enjoy or suffer the reactions of that work in a different body?
So this is the second doubt of Prachinabhari. Previously, he was talking about transmigration. Now he's talking more about karma. That as per the Vedas, when a person performs an action, the action disappears. So you do something, and as soon as you stop doing it, that action has disappeared. It ceases to exist. In fact, as you perform the action, it is also disappearing at the same time. Now, the reactions generated by the act, although existing, and this is Prachinabhari's doubt, that theoretically speaking, existing is not existing since there is no evidence of it existing. And Vishwanath Chakravarti paraphrases the doubt, saying that the reactions to the action, though existing, means that as per the scriptures are existing, but empirically there is no evidence of it existing. So when the karma has disappeared, the action has gone, then even the next moment, there should not be any consequences of that action. So how can you say that an action done will result in reaction at a different place and a different body? Say somebody takes birth in a different planet, in a different body, and then the reactions are now fructifying. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada gives a sneak preview of the answer. So he says that that atheists evidence for the resultant actions, atheists want evidence for the resultant actions of past activities. Therefore, they ask, what is the proof that I'm suffering and enjoying the resultant actions of that karma? They have no idea how the subtle body carries the result of the present body's action down to the next gross body. Right? So this is essentially the answer that Narad Muni will later on give. That it is the subtle body that is providing the continuity over different gross bodies. Prabhupada is giving us a heads up. And then he says that the subtle body carries the soul continuously. So in the material world, the subtle body is eternal. Even though the gross body changes, the subtle body never changes. From the time that the jiva falls to the time that the jiva is liberated, the same subtle body is accompanying. And it's the subtle body that is the vehicle of the law of karma and the science of transmigration. Now, one may wonder that why is Prachinabhari asking a question about Karma Kanda? Because essentially Karma Kanda is the one that is talking about the law of karma, talking about the transmigration of soul. So he has already heard about the futility of Karma Kanda. So why is he now asking questions about it? So one reason is that this was the primary preoccupation of Prachinabhari for his entire life. And even though he has understood the superiority of bhakti over karma and jnana, he is still curious that what drives people like him to invest their entire lives into karma kanda. Right? So he's asking for his benefit and for the benefit of the other person. Because karma kanda essentially is all about karma and transmigration of the soul. So it's not that Prachinabhari does not know about this basic concept, but the question actually is revealing a desire for a deeper clarification. That why do people become obsessed by it? And by people is including himself. That I was obsessed about. He was actually excessively obsessed about it. So he's trying to get to the bottom of it. In the Valmiki Ramayana, there is the story of King Satyavrata. So King Satyavrata, he is popularly known as Trishanku. So he was in the lineage, an ancestor of Lord Ram. And he's mentioned in the Balkand of Valmiki Ramayana that he was a very pious king. And he understood just by the instructions of his gurus that his next destination is going to be the heavenly planets. But he was also, so Satyavrata was also very handsome. His bodily features were very pleasing, strong built. He was very much attached to his own body, narcissistic in a way. So he argued that this gross body of mine was actually employed in performing all the pious activities that are now qualifying me to enter into the heavenly realms. So why should I have to give up this gross body? I should go to heaven in my gross body. So his priest said it's not possible. So he went to his family priest, Vaishna. And Vaishna, he also explained to him all about the science of reincarnation. He said, not possible. So he was still not satisfied. So he went to the sons of Vaishna. And so Vaishna had 100 sons. And when he approached them and basically put forward his proposition that I would like to go to the heaven in my own body, and the sons got very angry, saying that our father, your guru, has already instructed you. Now you're coming us and asking us to in fact try to say something against our own father. So you're disrespecting your guru, you're asking us to disrespect our father and guru, and you're disrespecting the scriptures. So they say you're acting like a Chandal, you should become a Chandal. So they cursed him to become a Chandal. So Satyavrata was still so much obsessed by this. Now, even though now his handsome body is gone, so he approaches Vishwamitra. And same story he repeats again. Now, Vishwamitra had a strong prior enmity with Vasishta. So he was not very much per se interested in Satyavrata, but he wanted to show down Vasishta. So he said, okay, I will perform a yajna, and then I will send you to heaven in your own body. So he sets a date for the yajna. He orders his disciples to go and invite all the sages to come and participate in the yajna. So when the sons of Vasishta heard, they refused to attend. And they actually ridiculed him, saying that what will be this kind of a yajna in which a Kshatriya will be a priest and a Chandal will be the jajma, the benefactor. So Vishwamitra was a Kshatriya by birth. So when Vishwamitra heard this, he became very angry and he cursed all the sons of Vasishta to die, which they died. And then he went ahead and performed the sacrifice, and then through the power of the sacrifice, he caused Satyavrata to ascend to the heaven. And then Indra, he refused to let him enter heaven. So he pushed him down, so he became stuck in between. That's why he was called Trishanku, one who was stuck in between. So Vishwamitra became even more angry now. And then by his power of his Shaktis, he actually began to create an alternate universe. So when Brahma saw this, he became alarmed. And he came down to Vishwamitra and said, you stop this. So Vishwamitra said, I cannot, because I have promised Satyavrata that he will go to heaven. So Brahma said, you have created an alternate heaven. Let that be preserved. Let Shanku reside over there and then stop the create, because he wanted to create the whole alternate universe, basically take on the role of Brahma. So Prachina Bahari's questions are similar to that of Trishanku. But the difference is that Trishanku became so obsessed that he was prepared to go against the instructions of his guru, the instruction of devotees, the Vedic injunction. Prachina Bahari, on the other hand, he is asking simply to clarify his own doubts, the doubts of others, and ultimately he wants to build conviction that what I am doing is going to be the absolute right path, because he has for such a long time traveled on a path that he thought was right but is not. So he wants that second assurance, because the first assurance was given by Narad Muni through his instructions. Now he's seeking reassurance. Okay, so let me pause over here. The next set of verses are Narad Muni's instruction on the science of transmigration. So there are 20 verses in which this is described in great details. So I'll stop here and see if there is any comments or discussions.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Regarding the karma and the reaction, it's an interesting topic, but always evades it's very difficult to understand also. So some karma fructify immediately and some karma fructify later on, some of them in the next life or next several life afterwards. And some people, it's very difficult to understand the logic why it should happen after several lifetime or or next life or something, when that soul has moved on to different life. Why not in the same lifetime, maybe 10 years later, 20 years later, but not after death, when you forget about everything, then you're living in a different body, in a different situation. As you're pointing out, we are suffering the reaction of the past life karma without any clue. So, and that also puts that person in a difficult situation, because he will never understand. Some people will understand, those who have scripture understand why he's undergoing some sudden reaction which has no clue, but other people will think it is unfair, and they will not be able to comprehend. Whereas if the reaction happened in the same life, then they will be able to understand, okay, this is the punishment for my previous karma in this life. So can you, is there anything that we can understand why it is happening like that, and any logic to it?
So thank you, Prabhu. So as you mentioned, that this is a question that is often asked, and there is some empirical understanding for it. I don't know if it is so it's been, obviously I've discussed this with different devotees, and it's been discussed in different lectures. The discussions do not contain like strong Vedic references, mainly because devotees don't generally read, or they're not very accomplished in those parts of the Vedas. But some of the understandings in this is, so you mentioned that in the next life a person forgets. Actually, the person forgets in this life also. So a person may perform some activities, and if it happens 5 years down the road, 99% of the time the person will have no recollection that, what did I do. And the second is that the very body that you get in the next life is a result of the karma in the previous life. So that itself is the vehicle to carry the karma. Prabhupada would say this, that when a prisoner is in the jailhouse, then he gets this uniform with the white and stripes, etc., which means that he has committed a crime, and he's being held accountable for it. Similarly, when the jiva soul has a body, it means that he has performed karma. So because karma is being performed non-stop, endlessly, so the body is going to be there endlessly, and it's going to be changing continuously. Some changes are more than others, but the changes are always happening. So predicating the fact that karma should fructify within a certain time frame or with the same body, they may give more visibility, but they will definitely not give the requisite visibility, right? Because karma is complex. A person may perform some activities and they may not even be considering it to be sinful, right? I think what you're thinking about is the more black and white case, that the person does something wrong and then something wrong happens to the person. So in his mind, he understands that there's a correlation. Right? But karma tends to be a lot more subtle. That you give in charity, and you may suffer. You may have to suffer because of giving in charity, or you may act harshly, and then you may enjoy the benefits of acting harshly, depending on the circumstance. So karma tends to be a lot more subtle than that. So these are just some of the thoughts. Like I said, the portions of the Vedas that talk about this extensively, I have not read. Prabhupada did not teach us. So difficult to answer with a lot of Vedic references.
Okay, Prabhu. Sure. So I was thinking, if I can summarize like this, that some karmas don't fructify in this life because the situations, the circumstances and time, place, and circumstances is not suitable, whereas the next life yields to that fructification because everything is suitably arranged. Can we say like that?
Absolutely, that is one of the reasons.
So that's what you said. The body is also because of the previous karma. That is the facility that one gets in order to experience and to the fullest extent. Okay, yeah. That makes sense. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anything else? Okay, if not, we'll move on to verse 60. So these sets of verses are they're a little bit complex. So I think we'll spend a little bit of time understanding the verses. And the advantage is that they will give us, we have a general understanding of transmigration, and these verses will give us a more specific understanding, a detailed understanding of how transmigration actually works. Verse 60. Narad-vacha yeneva rabate karma teneva mutratat puman bhungte hayaya vadhanena lingena manasa swayam.
The great sage Narada continued, the living entity acts in a gross body in this life. The body is forced to act by the subtle body, composed of mind, intelligence, and ego. After the gross body is lost, the subtle body is still there to enjoy or suffer. Thus, there is no change.
Right. So Narad Muni is now answering the question, and he is introducing the concept of the subtle body. That the living entity acts in the gross body, but even though it is acting in the gross body, it is forced to act by the subtle body. Right? So that distinction has been made. Because the gross body is lower. So both the gross and the subtle body, they're both jada. They're both insentient. But the subtle body is sitting closer to the soul. So the soul acts through the subtle body on the platform of the gross body. So even when the gross body is lost, because the subtle body is still there, that continuity is maintained. So that's why Narad Muni says, thus there is no change. Right? So there is nothing gets disconnected. It carries on. So Srila Prabhupada, and we'll see that Prabhupada will explain this a few times over. The whole thing of transmigration, he'll explain it a few times over for emphasis. So here Prabhupada again, he explains from a basic level. So he says that living entity has two kinds of body. It has a gross body and a subtle body. The gross body is composed of the 5 gross elements: earth, fire, water, air, and ether. The subtle body is composed of 3 subtle elements: mind, intelligence, and false ego. Then the gross body is the instrumental cover is the instrumental outer covering, and it is not capable of enjoying or suffering. And just like if you have a probe and you put the probe, if you have a temperature probe, whether you put it on hot or cold, all it will do is record the temperature. It won't say it's too hot or too cold. So similarly, the gross body is just the instrumental cover. It is not capable of enjoying or suffering. Then Prabhupada said that one actually acts and enjoys through the subtle body. So the subtle body's activities, be they pious or impious, create another situation for the living entity to enjoy or suffer in the next gross body. So the focus is now on the subtle body. The subtle body is acting, the subtle body is enjoying, and the subtle body is suffering. So when the gross body is lost, when it dies, then the root of the gross body, which is the subtle body, continues and brings about another gross body. So although the gross body apparently changes, the root of the gross body does not. The subtle body continues between innumerable changes of the gross body. Right? So this is essentially how the continuity is maintained in transmigration. That how the culpability is always maintained. Right? When somebody says that I did it in some previous lifetime, why do I have to suffer now? It's because the I is still the same. Right? It's like a person saying that today I wore a blue dress and I committed some crime. Tomorrow I come in a red dress. I should not be held accountable for it. And so the root of the gross body is culpable because it is the one that is doing. It is the one that is enjoying and suffering. So it is the one that needs to deal with the consequences also. Now, Prabhupada takes this to, and Prabhupada always does that, whenever there is some points that are made that are completely on the material platform, Prabhupada will try to link it with bhakti. So Prabhupada says in the purport that because the personality of Godhead, a super soul, is always guiding the individual soul always knows how to act according to the reactions of his previous karma. Right? So what is the methodology by which the consequences of previous activities are being carried over? By the Paramatma. So it is the Paramatma that it says that according to what one desires and deserves. So the desires is predicated on the free will. The deserve is predicated on the karmic reactions that are fructifying. And it is the Paramatma who is guiding. Now, contemporary also it is said that there are 2 demigods who are responsible for this. Yamraj is responsible for carrying from one lifetime to another, and Shani, who is the brother of Yamraj, step brother, I think, not the real, maybe real brother, but he's the brother of Yamraj. He is the one who is actually giving the consequences in this very life. That's why in Karma Kand, when a person is having bad lack or maybe things are not going well, then the focus of the prayer is on Shani. That Shani is, because Shani is giving the immediate reactions. And at one point it's mentioned that better than worshipping Shani is Hanuman. There's some pastime that is linked to how Shani takes shelter of Hanuman. Better than worshipping Shani is Hanuman, and worshipping of Hanuman is worshipping Lord Ram. So that's how it's connected to the personality of Godhead. Prabhupada also notes that because people lack this knowledge, they are bewildered about evolution. So he says that the materialistic philosopher Darwin has tried to study the changes of the gross body, but because he had no knowledge of either the subtle body or the soul, he could not clearly explain how the evolutionary process is going on. Okay, next verse, 61. Shayanam imam utsrijya swashantam purusho yatha karmatmanyahitam bhungte tadrishena trenava.
The living entity, while dreaming, gives up the actual living body through the activities of his mind and intelligence. He acts in another body, either as a god or a dog. After giving up this gross body, the living entity enters either an animal body or a demigod's body on this planet or on another planet. He thus enjoys the results of the actions of his past life.
So based on the previous verse that Narad Muni said, Prachinabhari may object that though the subtle body is the doer and the enjoyer, but it is being done through the gross body. So which means the gross body is a partner to it. Just like the subtle body is being held accountable for it, the gross body should also be held accountable. Which means that the enjoyment and the suffering should happen in the same gross body. Right? So that implicit doubt, Narad Muni is addressing. So Vishwanath Chakravarti says that it is true that it is the gross body which is procured through karma. Right? So he says, yes, the gross body is implicated in it. So an example is given that when a person goes to sleep and is dreaming, at that time he takes on another identity. Chakravarti Pad gives this example to understand. So in dreaming, you can take on any identity based on the nature of your dream. And then later on, when you wake up, you give up that identity. And then maybe you go to sleep again, and then you take on yet another identity. So he says this is the situation of transmigration, that the same soul is taking up and giving up various gross identities as it is transmigrating from one body to another. When he returns to the body, so when the person wakes up, he forgets most of the dream. So similarly, when a living entity is taking on subsequent bodies, he's forgetting about the previous gross bodies. So Srila Prabhupada notes that the existence of ghosts is testimony to the fact that all desires are actually the product of the subtle body and not the gross body. So he says, unless the living entity gets another gross body, he will continue to have a subtle body or a ghostly body. One becomes a ghost when a subtle body acts without the help of the instrumental gross body. So ghostly life is one of full desires, but unable to satisfy it. So what is the main point that is made in this verse is that while the gross body is closely implicated with the subtle body in performing karma, but the gross body itself is a result of karma. So the fact that the gross body is changing is a reflection of the fact that different karmas are fructifying at different points of time. So one cannot make this assertion that why is the gross body absolved of karma? If it is implicated in karma, why is it absolved of karma? And the point is that it is not. But its implication is in a different way. That the implication of the gross body is through the change of gross body. The implication of the subtle body is that it continues to enjoy or suffer the consequences of the actions. Both of them are implicated, but the implications are different because of the difference in the nature. Prabhupada gives the conclusion that the change of the gross body is not very important, but the change of the subtle body is important. Now, subtle body does not change, but what Prabhupada is talking about is the destruction of the subtle body. So essentially what he's talking about is going back to Godhead. So he's saying taking on different bodies is not very important, but getting a spiritual body is important. And he says that's the purpose of the Krishna consciousness movement. Okay, verse 62. Mamed manasa yadya asavaham iti bruvan driniyata puman radham karmayena punarbhavaha.
The living entity labors under the bodily conception of I am this, I am that. My duty is this, and therefore I shall do it. These are all mental impressions, and all these activities are temporary. Nonetheless, by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the living entity gets a chance to execute all his mental concoctions. Thus, he gets another body.
So this verse is explaining that how one's identity in the gross body causes the jiva to attain another gross body. And so this means that subsequent gross bodies are also derivatives of the previous ones, and therefore they are connected. So this also addresses the issue that why are gross bodies not implicated into the actions? The changing gross body seems to absorb the gross body, and the point is made no. Each gross body is connected. Based on the previous gross body, one develops a certain identity, and that identity determines the next gross body. So Vishwanath Chakravarti explains that, he expands on this, saying that the jiva performs actions considering himself to be the gross body. Then the reactions to the actions are stored in the subtle body. Now, the previous gross body is not necessary for these reactions to fructify, because the conception of I is anchored in the subtle body, not in the gross body. Right? So the cause of the bondage is not anchored in the gross body. It is anchored in the subtle body. And that is why actions that are performed in the aham mamatva platform are actually actions performed by the subtle body. And so the reactions are accrued to the subtle body. The gross body is incidental. So he says that having the same gross body is not really relevant, because the cause and the results of these actions is in the subtle body. So Prabhupada, once again, he expands on this and explains in further details. He says that as long as one is absorbed in the bodily conception of mamaita manasa yadir, his activities are performed on that platform. Now, this absorption is subtle body, right? So these conceptions are carried in the subtle body even after the destruction of the gross body. So when the gross body is finished, the plans of the living entity are taken up by the mind. And then by the grace of the Lord, the living entity gets a chance to give these plans shape in the next life. So here there is acceptance to the fact that all this is being done by the desire of Krishna. Right? Sometimes people say that, why is there law of karma? Why do we have to enjoy and suffer? And you can give some answer that, it's there to maintain balance, accountability. But after sufficient number of whys, the only answer is that this is what Krishna desires. Maybe there is something else he could have done other than law of karma. That would have been his desire. But by his desire, this is happening, right? Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that, I am the one who has put this into motion. So this is a point that is given in terms, because even though Narad Muni is answering a question about Prachinavari, he is also addressing the debates that happen on this. So in a debate, one may explain to the extent that is explainable. But at some point, you will have to say that this is by the grace of the Lord. So he makes this point over here. Narad Muni says in this verse that at death, one takes his plans with him to execute in yet another world. So that is Punarbhava. And Prabhupada says this is known as the law of karma. As long as the mind is absorbed in the laws of karma, a certain type of body must be accepted in the next life. Karma is the aggregate of fruitive activities conducted to make this body comfortable or uncomfortable. And then Prabhupada reiterates the point of the role of the supersoul. So he quotes two verses, 15:15, Sarvasya Hridisanimishto, that one acquires remembrance from the supersoul and begins to execute the plans. So 15:15 says that Krishna says, I am situated in everyone's heart, and from me comes remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. And then in 1861, Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam Vidashtrajana Tishtati, that the Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart and directing the wandering of all living entities. Right? So wandering seems to indicate whimsical traveling, but the whimsical is because the jiva is whimsical. But the super soul is not whimsically directing. The super soul is giving directions specifically based on the previous desires of the jiva and the accrued karma. So Prabhupada says that all these designations are of the same essence. There is no point in becoming a Brahmana in preference to an American, or becoming an American in preference to a Negro. After all, these are all bodily conceptions under the modes of material nature. Okay, I'll do one more verse and then, okay, this is a fairly involved verse, but let's do it. I think it's related. Yathano me yate chittam ubayerendriyogramam indriye hitaha evam pragyahajam karma lakshate chitavrittibi.
One can understand the mental or conscious position of a living entity by the activities of two kinds of senses: the knowledge acquiring senses and the executive senses. Similarly, by the mental condition or consciousness of a person, one can understand his position in the previous life.
So this verse answers the question that once an action is performed, it is done. It is in the past. It has disappeared. So how can one enjoy or suffer the results of that later on? Whether it is later in that lifetime or later in the next life or 10 million lives later on, how is that possible? Right? So essentially, this verse is giving proof to the law of karma. So when the person performs an action, the action creates an impression which is stored in the antakarana, the chitta of the person. Now, one can say, what is this chitta? So Nad Muni says that one can infer the chitta of the person by seeing how is the person's 10 senses operating. And there are 5 karmendriyas and there are 5 jnanendriyas. So chitta is subtle. You may not be able to touch it or see it, but you can infer it. How? By seeing how the 10 senses of the person are operating. So Prabhupada explains that when a person is shouting, we can infer that he is angry. Or when he's dancing and singing, we know he is happy. Now, anger and happiness, they have no material component. It's not that when person is angry, then a label comes on the person that this is angry or happy. But the way the 10 senses are operating will give us insight into the consciousness of the person. So from this, what do we understand? That actions are linked to consciousness, right? So this is the first what's the underlying principle that is made. The Prabhupada says that, as one says, the face is the index to the mind. Right? So when a person is smiling, is happy. If he's scowling, is unhappy. Right? So from this we can understand there is a connection between the gross and the subtle. There is a connection between the gross body and the subtle body. So in the Bhagavatam, when Angira visited Maharaj Chitraketu, then Chitraketu externally was doing everything in a nice way to serve the sage. But then the sage says, by seeing your face, I can understand that you are unhappy. Even though his actions do not indicate, but the expression on his face indicated that he was unhappy. So just like one can infer subtle by gross, just like one can infer consciousness by actions, similarly, the actions will be also linked to the consciousness. Right? So the connectivity is then going both ways. One is empirically established, second is inductively established. That by the gross, one is able to understand the subtle, which also means that the other way will also work. So, for example, if somebody was very violent in the previous lives, So those actions are now going to impact the subtle. Right? So we understand the difference, that we are seeing how the subtle is impacting the gross. When a person is happy, he's singing. So it means also the gross impacts the subtle, which means that if a person is violent, then those actions will impact the consciousness of the person. So if that connectivity is understood, the law of karma is understood. That when a person does some actions, they're gross, but we have established that there is a connectivity between the gross and the subtle, which means those actions will leave an impact on the subtle body. And since the subtle body is eternal, the consequences of those actions will carry over as long as the subtle body is carrying over, which is forever. Right? So that essentially is now giving a scientific proof to karma. So Prabhupada will now extend this to spirituality. So he says that the mind of a person in Krishna consciousness also acts in a similar way. The tongue chants the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, the hand is raised in ecstasy, and the legs dance. Right? So this is the impact of the subtle on the gross. Subtly, the mind is in Krishna consciousness, and from a gross perspective, Prabhupada says the Ashta Sattvika Vikar, that the physical transformation of the body is happening. And when Prabhupada was once in LA, and somebody asked him that, how come your students appear so happy? Are there any physical changes in them? Because this was the age of psychedelic drugs, where people took consciousness altering drugs like LSD. So this person was trying to get some understanding that why are they happy? Is there something physically changing in them? Prabhupada said, yes. There are so many physical changes happening. We have seen it practically. Our students have changed after they have joined us, and we have changed, and we have seen them change after they left us also. So in order to explain this, then Prabhupada actually quotes a conversation between Mahaprabhu and the residents of Kulin Gram. So the residents of the Kulin Gram, they once asked Mahaprabhu, what is the duty of a Vaishna? So first Mahaprabhu says that the duty of a Vaishnava is to chant the holy name and serve other Vaishnavas. So then they ask, who is the Vaishnava? So Prabhupada says, one who chants Mahaprabhu says, one who chants the holy name even once is a Vaishnava. So they're a little bit surprised, they ask again. So then Mahaprabhu said, one who is constantly chanting the holy name. Right. So then they ask again, and the third answer is relevant to the discussion. They say that Mahaprabhu says that a Vaishnava is one by seeing whom one gets inspired to chant the holy name. So how is this relevant? Because seeing is a gross activity. So just by seeing a Vaishnava, this is just the eyes seeing the Vaishnava, but then the person gets inspired to chant. That's consciousness. So this relationship between the gross and the subtle is being implied. So it implies that there is a two-way connection between consciousness and the action of the senses. So similarly, in one's previous lives, the actions impact the consciousness, and in this life, the consciousness impacts the actions. So transitively, what we can understand, the actions in the previous life are impacting the actions in this life. This essentially is the law of karma. So this is also explained in the Nectar of Devotion, And there it's a more technical description that one who performs sinful activities, there are two results. There is prarabdha and aprarabdha. So prarabdha is the manifest reaction and the aprarabdha is unmanifest. So the unmanifest is the one that is subtle. So it goes into kuta, it goes into bij, and it is stored in chitta. And then later on, it will fructify into papam. So that there's that, in Bhakti Shastra, you would have done that cycle of kuta, bij, papam, aprarabdha, prarabdha. So that way it goes on. So that is essentially explaining the connection between gross and subtle. So once Srila Prabhupada had gone to the Jew temple, and then he noticed that there were many rats in the temple. So he said that in this temple, people are not chanting Hare Krishna. So the disciples were hurt and they asked, why are you saying that? So then Prabhupada explained that one who chants purifies the consciousness, right? The connection between gross and subtle. And the symptom of a purified consciousness is cleanliness, the connection between subtle and gross. Right? So he said the fact that there is no cleanliness being maintained in this temple means that the chanting is not done properly. So last point, and this I guess I'm a little bit over times, that the present actions of chitta may not result into actions of the gross body right away. Vishnu Chakravarti says that when the operations of a chitta unite with a certain action, the chitta appears to be auspicious or inauspicious. So this is essentially saying that karma will fructify at an appropriate time. Or a natural question would be that if I accept this connection between gross body and subtle body, when will it fructify? And Chakravarti Path says that at an appropriate time. It is another way of saying that Krishna was based on the law of karma, or the Mahajans know. But understanding the principle is the important understanding here. Okay, so I'll stop here and see if you have any comments or questions.
Prem Krishna Guru has a question.
No problem. I'm good.
So just one question, Prabhu. Hopefully people will tolerate me. The thing is, you said about the connection between the subtle body and the gross body and the chit and the action. So you were telling there is a two-way connection. So my understanding is, first the action, before the action comes, it's a thought which happens. One has to thinking, what's that? What they say? Thinking, feeling, and willing. So it has to come at that level, and then the action comes. So therefore, first the subtle body actually performs its work, which then manifests into action. So, but in that case, any action would have the same origin. So then how can we say there's a two-way connection? That's is there anything that I'm missing?
So what you're explaining is the connection between the subtle and the gross, right? And the point is made is that there is a reverse connection also between the gross and the subtle. That depending on the action, one develops impressions. So this is the whole principle of samskar, that actions create lasting impressions on the consciousness of the body. Like from the devotional perspective, Prabhupada gives the example, right? That when you chant, you will feel happy. Chanting is activity of the tongue, the gross sense, and happiness is now in this case, it's spiritual happiness, but for the context here, happiness, it's more, it's more subtle, right? So both way, the connection is always being maintained there. The example of, Prabhupada saying that if one's conscious is not purified, then his surrounding, he will not maintain the surroundings in a purified way. And conversely, if the surrounding is not purified, it will impact the consciousness in a negative way.
Okay, in other words, it's a reaction of one's action. That reaction is what is relating the outside with the inside.
That's what the Nectar Devotion says, that, that after, there it is called papam, because all material activities are sinful. So the result of papam is one is the immediate reaction, that activity that happens, prarabdha. The aprarabdha part of it, that is the reaction that goes into the subtle body. It goes to kuta, bij, and then fructifies later on.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyev cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namo. Anant Koti Vaishnavind ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Jai Gaur Premanand. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.